Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're here today with our good friend, Reverend Brandan Robertson. Brandon is a noted author, activist, and public theologian working at the intersections of spirituality, sexuality, and social renewal. He's an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ, serving as the pastor of Sunnyside Reformed Church in New York City. He is host of the Queer and Christian podcast, and he's widely known as the TikTok pastor with nearly 300,000 followers and 10 million views. Wow. Brandon has authored, edited, or contributed to over 25 books on spirituality, justice, and theology. His writings have appeared in many publications, including Time, Huffington Post, NBC, Washington Post. He's currently a columnist for Baptist News Global, Los Angeles Blade, and for Bishop John Shelby Spong's Progressing Spirit newsletter. His insights are regularly featured across global media outlets such as CNN, NPR, MSNBC, and the Washington Post. Rolling Stone magazine listed him in its 2021 Hot List, spotlighting top creatives shaping the future. He's spoken at many prestigious platforms like the White House, Westminster Abbey, Oxford University, and the Parliament of World Religions. He's taught seminars for institutions such as the San Francisco Theological Seminary, the Lakelands Institute, Disciples Seminary Foundation, and the Wisdom Center. Brandon has also been an honored member of many advisory committees for entities like the Democratic National Convention, the U.S. Department of State, and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. In 2020, he was named a fellow of the Salzburg Global Seminar. In 2023, was named a Senior Digital Ministry Fellow of Convergence. A stalwart champion for LGBTQ plus rights, the Human Rights Campaign lauded him as a top faith leader, fervently advancing LGBTQ plus equality. In 2024, the LGBTQ plus Religious Archives Network honored Brandon for his prophetic leadership for queer inclusion in the Christian church. He's also part of the Red Letter Christians Leaders Network, a founding member of the Union of Affirming Christians, a patron of One Body, One Faith, and an advisor for the Center for Progressive Christianity, Love Boldly, the Global Interfaith Commission on LGBTQ plus Lives, and the Ozane Foundation. Brandon is currently pursuing a PhD in Biblical Studies at Drew University and currently resides in New York City. Brandon has presented at several of our past conferences and contributed to our book, How to Heal Our Divides. His new book is Queer and Christian, Reclaiming the Bible, Our Faith, and Our Place at the Table. You can read all about Brandon, all of his wonderful work at brandanrobertson.com. So Brandon, welcome back and many, many congratulations on all of your great work.
Thank you so much. I really need to shorten that bio, but I really appreciate you having me.
Well, you've accomplished so much and you're involved in so much and your productivity is so high. It's quite impressive. And one of the things I didn't even do is list some of the titles of your previous books that I want to talk about in a minute, but didn't have room for those in the intro. So we'll talk about them in a moment.
Well, thank you. And yes, I know those of us Enneagram 3 high productivity types, I know you're one of them. And I've been so grateful to be having conversations about so many of these books and contributing to books with you. So thanks again for having me.
Well, I have for a long time really appreciated your work and your collaboration. And you're one of the folks that I couldn't be happier for with all of the things that you've accomplished, and know that that will continue in a big and serious way. So many blessings and many thanks.
Likewise.
So, given all of that, is there anything else you want people to know about you? That was kind of a formal set of things, not informal.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, just my focus for the last 2 years has been on this book, and now it's that place of getting it birthed into the world. And we're not just putting out a book, but I am, as we were talking about before we recorded, I'm going to 40 cities across the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom to not just promote this book, but to really have conversations in a moment where I don't think any of us realized how under attack the trans community and LGBT community would be in 2025, but we're in this space where these conversations are just as important and more important than ever. And so I'm really
Yes.
excited to be going on that tour this year and getting
Yes,
to
I
have.
mean, I'm so glad to hear about that, and I'm sure that'll be well received, and just very glad to hear it. So I guess I should ask you though, did you watch the Masters at all yesterday?
You know, I watch no sports. People always ask me about the Yankees because I wear this hat. I
Yeah,
love
yeah.
the logo, but I've never seen a Yankees game and have no
Well,
clue about any of the sports.
well, Rory McIlroy from Ireland won
Yeah,
the Masters, which meant that he had won in his career all of the golf Grand Slam events, which only I think five other golfers have ever done something like that in the whole history of golf. So it was a big deal for an Irish man to have
impressive.
accomplished it.
Yeah, Ireland's doing a lot of good work. There's a lot of goodness coming out of Ireland right now, politically, religiously, all of it. So it's not a
So
surprise to me that they're winning.
you're gonna be stopping there on your tour, right?
Yeah, totally. And I have great affection for Ireland. Most every tour I've ever done internationally has had a large portion in Ireland. Like there's such a receptivity to this conversation. So
Good, good. Well, I thought that, the whole Ireland, UK area was a good market for you, if I remember correctly.
yeah, it is. My first book was published primarily to the UK by a UK publisher. And so that's 12 years ago when I started forming relationships there. And again, I was like 21 years old going on a bookstore and was so welcomed and connected to so many really amazing communities all across the UK that, I mean, I almost identify more with that part of the world these days than I do in America. So,
Yeah, well, maybe I should spend some more time over there too.
yeah.
So as I mentioned earlier, I want to talk about a couple of Brandon's previous books because they're so excellent. Um, One of them is True Inclusion, Creating Communities of Radical Embrace, which was recognized as an Indies Book of the Year award finalist. And one of my favorites, which I think is very underappreciated, is Filled to be Emptied, The Path to Liberation for Privileged People. It's just a great book. Could you say a few words about those two books?
Yeah, I mean, looking back, I've spent the past decade writing about a book a year. And on one hand, I had this moment in my 30s, I'll say, where I was like, what was I doing in my 20s that I thought I had something to say that needed to be published every single year? But both of those books weren't really me trying to teach or impose or impart some sort of wisdom. They were actually coming from like real, they were almost diary entries. So true inclusion happened when I, at 25 years old, was made senior pastor of a progressive inclusive church. But it was also at the time of Trump's first presidency and George Floyd and the Women's March. And so we began having questions as a community about what does it mean to be truly inclusive beyond having a rainbow flag and a gay pastor? Like, there's got to be something more. And so it's a very small book, but it was born out of the real conversations I was having with my congregation and board leaders about how do we take Jesus's inclusion imperative to its logical, radical conclusion, and then Filled to be Emptied, which I agree. Not many people know about that book, but it is
Oh,
probably
it's so
like
good.
because it was born out of this conversation around privilege that I was afraid of as a white man to have 8 years ago. But I was pastoring a church, and George Floyd's murder had just happened, and this word was coming into people's consciousness, and people needed to figure out how to grapple with it. And it occurred to me that the Philippians 2 passage, the Kenosis hymn, which many Christians will be familiar with, was actually a great tool to understand privilege, to understand how those of us who have different degrees of privilege might be able to utilize that for the good of others. And so I preached a sermon series called Filled to be Emptied, and then um, sat down and tried to turn it into a book that, again, is not me teaching as if I have something to say revolutionary about privilege, but rather trying to help Christians see that we actually have always had the resources to talk about these big topics that seem new to so many people, but they're actually at the heart of our faith. Giving up your privilege is a Christian practice that has always
Really.
existed. Um, and so that's what that book is about.
It was so, I mean, even for someone like myself that, has read a lot of different books, right, around social justice and things, it was still enlightening for me. And also, I think, I hate to say a wake-up call, but that's kind of what white America certainly needs. And, so for you to shine a light that specifically on that one topic, to me was very, very helpful. And, just to get people aware of the issue and considering the question, I think, is still dramatically needed.
Yeah. More so now than ever.
Yes, unfortunately. So let's get to the new book. As I mentioned, the title is Queer and Christian, Reclaiming the Bible, Our Faith, and Our Place at the Table. Do you have a copy of it there with you?
Ew. The blur
Awesome.
is not going to make it look great, but that's it.
Oh, no, it's good. It's good. Um, so how did that book come about?
Yeah, this is a book I didn't want to write. I've written two, three, depending on how you count, other books about LGBT
Yeah.
and Christianity, and I didn't really think there was much more to say. But this new publisher reached out and said, I want to offer you a book deal. I would love you to write anything you want to write, but before we allow you to write what you want to write, you need to write a book about LGBT and Christianity. To which I said, are you crazy? I've already done this. What else is there to say? But I ended up being very grateful because when I sat down to write this book, what I hadn't actually realized is that in my decade of work in this area and in the scholarship that I've been studying in my PhD program and master's program, my perspective has changed dramatically from where I began when I started trying to help people reconcile their faith and sexuality. And I'm actually much more progressive, much more radical, and I think there's a version of queer Christianity that it extends beyond the LGBT community. It's a conversation about how we understand what Christian faith is, and queerness can actually be a helpful lens for all people to think
Yes,
through that.
yes,
So
yes.
that is what this book ended up becoming. It's
Oh,
got one
wow.
section about the clobber passages. You got to do that stuff. But the rest of it really is intended to help all Christians, whether they're LGBT or not, see the radical subversive nature that Christianity has inherent in it and apply that to sexual ethics, apply that to spirituality, apply that to how we read the Bible and how we engage with conservative Christian nationalists. Like all of that is actually in this book. And I don't think most people would recognize that just by looking at the cover. But
Yeah,
when I talk about queerness, it's a way of seeing the world more than it is an identity related to sexuality.
very cool. Very cool. I was going to ask you that very question because, I knew you'd already written all these books about, the intersection between, queerness and Christianity. So I said, okay, well, how's this one different? So
Yeah,
that's really good to hear that you're universalizing it. Is that a word?
yeah,
Extending, the whole, queerness concept to shed a light on, the true intent of Christianity.
yeah. I mean, it's the reason I've resonated with the word queer so much. And I recognize, I mean, one of the things Gene Robinson wrote the forward, and he does a great job of highlighting there's a lot of division around the word queer in the LGBT community. Older LGBT folks tend to not like the word because it was derogatory and a slur in their day. Millennials, Gen Z, in our world, it's been a word that has been used more and more by more and more people
Yes.
to just mean that we don't fit in or like labels or categories. And my hope in this book was that it seems to be doing that in the generations that are reading it, that it's bridging that divide and helping people see that queerness, again, Bell Hooks defines it in chapter one. I quote her. She says, queerness not as in who I want to have sex with, but as in being at odds with everything and everyone around it. Jesus calls us to push off the systems that make us conform. Jesus calls us to not be conformed to the image of this world, but to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. To me, that has always been a call to queerness, exactly what we're trying to get at with this word. And um, and I do think the LGBT community has something to teach the church uniquely about how to do this. But I also think it's high time that men are liberated from this toxic masculinity that folks have been forced to live into, and that women are liberated from what it means to be a biblical woman, and they get to express themselves however they want to express themselves. We all need a little bit of queering, and I think our faith invites us into that journey.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there were a couple of areas that I was really glad that included in the book. One was about queer saints in the Bible.
Yeah.
So I'm not very familiar
Yeah.
with that. Can you explain a little bit about what you wrote in there?
Yeah. I mean, again, if you would have asked me 10 years ago about what I wrote in this book about queer saints, I would have rolled my eyes and said, oh no. Um, and I think a lot of people have that reaction when people start saying things like David and Jonathan were gay. Um, Understandably, people are resistant to that because one, it's anachronistic. That wasn't an identity that was used back then, so it doesn't quite fit. But the more, especially in my current PhD program, the more I've actually studied the culture and context of Scripture, and the more I've read the stories of Scripture from a scholarly and critical eye, the more it becomes so clear that there are so many
Mm,
lauded characters of the Bible that transgress gender, cultural, and sexual boundaries of their day
mm,
and are actually honored because of it. Part of what makes these people the saints that they are is that they stepped outside of their gender role or they don't embody sexuality in the way that their culture uh, would have expected them to. And so I really bring both a scholarly lens to some of these characters in the Bible to help show people why David and Jonathan, if you actually read that story, I found that I had never actually read the story in its entirety. And when you do, it's undeniable that there is something going on here that is transgressing sexual, gender, friendship boundaries. I don't make the conclusion that David and Jonathan or Ruth or Naomi were queer. I do make the case that they were transgressive. And in that sense, they were queer, but maybe not LGBT. And the other aspect and reason that I did that section was the other thing I've come to recognize is that all Bible interpretation is not actually about getting to the author's intent, but it's about how you as a community can read the story and find parallels to your community's experience in the story. That's how people actually read the Bible. Most people don't admit that they read the Bible that way. And the title of the book, Reclaiming the Bible, is part of the subtitle. The whole idea there is to help queer people be able to pick up this book that has been used as a weapon against us and say, it's okay for you to bring your experience to the text. And here are some characters in the Bible whose experiences
mm,
mirror ours. So,
mm,
for instance, Joseph and Joseph of the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, right? That's a profound story about a young man who wears a garment that the Hebrew makes gender ambiguous, and many scholars have translated the garment that Joseph wears as a woman's dress.
mm,
We
mm,
can't be sure what the author was actually intending, but that is one of the interpretive possibilities. And Joseph is rejected and bullied by his brothers because of how he dresses and how he shows up in the world. What I do with that story is say, this is a trans person's experience. They don't fit with their gender. They start getting bullied by people for not fitting in. They have a parent that affirms them. Joseph's father is the incredible person in the story who gives his son a dress to wear. And it becomes this beautiful and profound story that can be so healing for a trans person to see their life in the Bible. Um, and so that's really what that whole section is about. It's
wow,
just,
that's very cool.
yeah, helping folks to
Good for
reclaim.
you. Good for you to bring out role models,
Yeah.
in essence, that's so there's another section that I love, which is responses to commonly asked questions by queer folks and allies who are, basically feeling lost within, the broader Christian faith. Um, I love things that are practical, and section, strikes me as very practical.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this section is my favorite part of the book. I think most of the meat of the book, in my opinion, is in this section. And it's also the most controversial and the section I really labored over and wrote and rewrote because, for instance, the chapter on sex and sexual ethics, this is a conversation that I want to get right. I don't want to just be lackadaisical and tell people, sleep with whoever you want and it's all okay. And yet, very few other folks in the LGBT Christian conversation have actually been willing to have a very progressive sexual ethic or even admit that they have a progressive sexual ethic. There's in the queer Christian community actually a big division right now between those who think that fearing Christianity is actually a problem, and there's a whole section of the LGBT Christian community that's very much against progressive LGBT Christians. And so I wanted to write a resource for those like me who felt like I didn't fit within even the affirming traditional Christian environments, right?
Mm, mm,
Um, that's not how my faith is expressed. That's not how I live out my sexuality. That's not how I do my ethic. I am coming from a more progressive perspective. And what you find in this last section of the book is truly what I hope is a scaffolding for a queer progressive Christian ethic of all things. Sex, so we do talk about things like what about people in open relationship? What about people in polyamorous relationship? Is there a way that those relationships can be healthy and good? I explore that. We talk about what does queer spirituality look like, meaning lots of queer Christians don't want to go back into the institution of the church, and rightfully so. Is there a way for them to have a Christian spirituality outside of an institution? And I explore that. One of the big sections that a lot of people have commented on is I get asked all the time what to do about ex-gays, people who claim to have been healed of their sexuality. I have found that very few people are actually willing to be straightforward on this. And so the opening line to that chapter is ex-gays don't exist. Like, you just got to say it. So this section was me answering questions that I've been wrestling with for 10 years in a way that I hope is clear, helpful, and provides the scaffolding for folks to begin to think through the complex issues of life in a non-black and white, rigid framework that so many of us, even in progressive Christianity, still function within so often.
Wow. Well, good for you for number one, attacking what are very difficult subjects, right? I mean, and that doesn't surprise me that you're doing that, but good for you for doing that because I mean, there are a lot of those kinds of things that people want to ignore.
Yeah. And that, I mean, again, to my publisher's point, I think they recognized that there was a gap in this market of an accessible guide that actually tackles the questions people are actually wrestling with rather than kind of abstract theological arguments. I love
Hmm.
an abstract
Yeah.
theological argument and I spend all day talking about that. But the people on TikTok that I'm engaging with are never going to get a seminary degree. Many of them are never going to go into a church, but they do need to heal from the religious trauma they've had. And I hope that Queer and Christian is a book anyone can read, anybody can understand. And most importantly, in this era of Christian nationalism, the reclaiming of the Bible section of this book is so important to me. I want to get
Yeah.
secular queer people and Christian queer people alike um, conversant in biblical language so that they understand how they can wrest the Bible from the grasp of those in power right now that are using it against us. And
Yeah.
that's what I hope this book does in an accessible way.
Good, good, good. So you have a ton of endorsements for this book, which is not surprising, but I'd like to read from a couple of them. This one is from none other than Walter Brueggemann, who says, an urgent work to which careful attention should be given. So that's a wonderful thing to hear him say.
Yeah, yeah, he's, I mean, obviously been an inspiration to me and so many folks, especially on this topic. He moved forward on queer inclusion before many people did. And also, to be very candid about him, um, he was very clear. There are areas of this book that he disagrees with. There's a couple scholars that who endorsed it, but I was able to have like a real back and forth with some of these folks because let's be real, like this is a, I think one thing I do say in this book that I've never said before is that these are nuanced conversations, that there is not
Yeah,
certainty on any of
yeah,
this. Uh,
yeah.
and so I was glad that Dr. Brueggemann sent me a great email with the endorsement that's like, here's all the things I think you're absolutely wrong on. And I still think this book is important. So here's an endorsement. And that,
Excellent,
yeah,
excellent. Well, I mean, I have yet to meet a single person that I agree with on everything.
totally.
100% theology or 100% of politics.
Yep.
They're way too complicated and too nuanced, and everybody's got their own opinion on this little topic or that little topic or whatever. So, you know,
Yeah. But it's such a lost art in our day. We think that
yes,
if somebody disagrees, then the whole thing must be bad. And it's like, no, in this conversation and all conversations, we should all disagree with each other on something and still
yeah.
be in conversation and recognize the goodness of the work that each other are doing. So it was great to see him do that.
So here's another quote from Don Lemon um, that I've heard many people say about you, Brandon. He says Brandan Robertson is fearless and one of the clearest voices on faith and LGBTQ plus inclusion. So I personally feel that way, and I'm really glad, that other people see it exactly that way.
Yeah. And Don is a great guy. I met him years ago, and he just actually released a book on faith and his own journey as a gay man and dealing with his own religion. And again, like say, I think so many both queer people and allies are leaning into the fearlessness of this moment. We need to be fearless in this moment because the other side is just trying to stoke us to fear. And
Yeah.
that is one thing I try to do with this book and with my platform is like engage conservatives without demonizing them. Um, because we're never going to change hearts or minds or build a better country or world if we don't talk to the other side. And Brian, you're also a great image of someone who does this. And your series, How to Heal Our Divides, was all about this. How do you have values, things you believe, but then fearlessly lean into conversations with other people? And one of the reasons I'm so grateful for your work in Witness in the World is because you do that so well.
Well, thank you. But there's one other attribute that, I see in you so heavily that I know has been part of my own persona too, is that you're very driven, to do the right thing, to accomplish things, to make the world a better place. What do you think that drive comes from for you?
That's a deep question, and I've spent lots of time in therapy thinking about it because I do. I mean, I think part of it is I grew up in a family where there was no trajectory for life. Um, Very lower class trailer park, very little money, and I was told that I really wouldn't have much of a future.
Hmm.
And it was both my faith when I came to Christ initially, and then the church community coming around me and saying, as a young person, like, God has a plan for you and you can contribute something to your world. Your circumstances don't determine your outcome. And that is something that drives me and that I really do try to encourage and like my friends and anybody I get to encounter is that like we all have something to offer the world and we live in a day where we're oversaturated with influencers and people making quick money and quick success. But like folks like Brian McLaren and these folks that I got to meet early on in my journey really showed me what Eugene Peterson calls a long faithfulness in the same direction.
Hmm.
Being really committed to something and believing in something and just working at it. And when you do that, success comes. And I don't mean that in some like prosperity way. I just mean like,
No, but people resonate with you. I mean,
yeah, there's something about being committed to a message and to a community and to just working at that. And
absolutely.
it's so weird to be saying like, for me, I've said it multiple times in our interview, 10 years ago feels like a lifetime ago for me because I'm only 30, but uh, like I've been doing this for 10 years and it is really beautiful to be in a place where I'm actually seeing the seeds of that work begin to grow. Um, and again, I'm so grateful for the folks along the way who have encouraged and worked with me in this. So
Well, for me, it's like, people like Brian McLaren and I are, not exactly as young as you are, so you got a long runway, to be able to use the gift that you've been given, gifts, I should say, but, the gift of being driven is what I was specifically referring to here. But you've got so many other gifts in addition that's a very encouraging thing to me, is that you've shown over an extended period of time your ability to use those gifts with great stewardship, I would say. And, just so long after people like Brian and I are gone, you'll still be able to do that, which is, just to me, a wonderful thing to know and think about.
thank you. Although, Brian, I have to say, I am tired. I'm ready to take a little bit of a break after this
Well,
book.
you deserve it. After you take that long road trip,
Yeah,
I hope you enjoy the rest of the summer after that and relax a little bit.
yeah, yeah.
So, over my lifetime personally, as an older guy, I've seen us come a long way as a society on the whole, LGBT attitude, for lack of a better term. But the pendulum has swung back and forth, and it's not exactly, at least my own perception, going in the right direction at the moment. How do you see things?
Yeah, let me be completely pessimistic. I have never been more fearful in America. I spend a lot of my time as a queer person critiquing President Trump very publicly. Um, and I think that there is a very real chance in the next 3.5 years that um, any of us who do any sort of critical work, and especially representing marginalized communities, could actually face very real consequences, whether that's being harassed at the border after an international trip or actually sued or put in prison. Like we're actually heading in that direction. And the LGBT community, I think the conversations I've been a part of, we fully expect marriage equality to at least be attempted to be overturned in the next 3 years, likely will be overturned with the current Supreme Court. Um, Protections for trans folks they were non-existent to begin with, and now they're going in the opposite direction. Um, and so this is a real moment where it's a wake-up call for us on the left, at least my generation, who doesn't have the span of seeing the pendulum go back and forth.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think so many of us were in a daze, believing the progress was done. We're here. We're moving in the right direction. We won. Clearly, we haven't won. And the fight is still here, and it's really going to impact real people. And so this is why I think progressive churches are actually more important now than ever. Even for
absolutely.
people that don't believe in God, this is a place of organizing and community, and that is what is necessary now. If we're going to survive the next 3.5 years with any sort of dignity and grace, it's going to be together in community. And I really hope queer people and marginalized people and anybody who's fearful steps into a local faith community, whether that's your Jewish progressive synagogue or progressive church or mosque or whatever, so that you can have community, you can organize for justice, um, and we can actually resist some of what is going to come down the pipe.
Amen. So, back to the book. What would you most like readers to take away from it?
I think the biggest thing is just an invitation, of permission to queer their faith, um, permission to not feel like there are no rules for how you express your faith or how you engage the Bible. And yet, most of us grew up in religious traditions that only taught us rules. And even, again, progressive people or agnostic people still subconsciously feel constrained by the rules that we were given. And what I hope this book does is show a vision of one person's attempts to deconstruct the rules of Christianity around sex, around gender, around spirituality. And what I present, I hope, is life-giving and healing and exciting to people. Because ultimately, the goal of this book is really to get my community, the LGBT community, to engage the Bible again, which you would think conservatives would be on board with, but they're certainly not with this book. Um, because the Bible is this profound text that has been used to spark almost every liberation movement in our country's history. And I think there's so much wisdom and insight in the Bible and in the Christian tradition for my community and for all communities if we're free to engage with them queerly. So I want people to have an invitation to re-engage Christianity uh, with a queer lens.
Good, good. So you kind of hinted on this a little bit earlier, but and I know you're in the throes of a big book launch, but is there anything you can say about in terms of future books or other projects
Yeah.
that are able to be talked about at this point?
Yeah, my next book is due in August, although I just told them I'm not turning it in until December. So, but really,
Good.
yeah, I mean, we're in an era where let's do some publishing talk for a second. Um, Devotionals are actually kind of having a big comeback, these kind of
Yeah.
short, reflective books. But there's not a lot of progressive devotionals out there. Diana Butler Bass is a great one about to come out from my publisher, and there's been a few. Sarah Bessie and some other folks released some over the past years. So I wanted to write a 52-week,
Hmm.
not conservative like devotional where I give you a Bible verse and you write something like, but that actually helps people apply a progressive Christian faith to the real challenges of life, the real
Mm,
things that we actually
mm.
are going through. So I don't know exactly what that will end up looking like when it's done, but that's where we've landed. I have to say we've gone back and forth. There's been like 15 different iterations of what this next book could be, uh, because the world keeps changing, and that's what I write to the moment, right? And the moment changes every other day. So we'll see. But some sort of progressive Christian is a
Good.
big resource. Yeah.
Good, good, good. Oh, that's wonderful to hear. I'm glad. I mean, one of the things I've always loved about, your books is that they're so practical. They're tied to reality, not, you know, focused on just something that happened 2,000 years ago or whatever. They're focused on how do we take all of that and all of who we are and what do we do about it today? And that's to me the crux of the matter. So
Yeah.
I'm always glad when you come out with a new book, and I'm really glad when this next one comes out too.
Thank you so much, as always, for all of your support and all of your good writing in the world. It's truly incredible to get to be connected with you. So thank you for
Well,
having
same here. It's been a privilege and sincere joy. So Brandon, I mean, thanks so much, for this book, for all of your work, for joining us. Um, again, the name of the book, the title of the book is Queer and Christian, Reclaiming the Bible, Our Faith, and Our Place at the Table. Please go check out Brandon's website, brandanrobertson.com. And Brandon spells his name Brandan,
me.
Robertson, brandanrobertson.com. So he's got a whole schedule on there of events, and places that he'll be around the country and around the world. So, go hear him speak in person, not just on Zoom.
Yeah, I'll be in a town near almost everybody listening, I'm sure. So come out and
Good,
hang out with us.
good. Well, Brandon, thanks again, and best wishes on this book launch.
Thank you so much.